Chris, I'm tossing it to you to introduce our guest that really needs no introduction.
Yeah, you definitely know this guy. And y'all, the chat is going off. I appreciate that. So many Louisiana people showing up. I'm very happy that that's the case. But let's go ahead and get it going. With us, we have Jonathan Friedman. He is the Director of Free Expression and Education Programs at Penn America, which you all know very well. He oversees research, advocacy, and education related to academic freedom, educational gag orders, book bans, and general free expression in schools, colleges, and university. And I mean, we are so delighted to have you here, Jonathan. This is a remarkable opportunity, especially for teachers and all the pre-service teachers that want to be teachers, but maybe, have some concerns about how to navigate this. So we're going to ask a few questions, and we would love to hear questions from you. So try to put them in the chat, and we'll be collecting them as we go. And we want to reiterate that we are here for an open and honest conversation based in good faith and respect. Please keep that in mind as we, move forward with this conversation. You are welcome to pose questions that you might think are difficult or challenging, and we would love to, hear from all of you. With that, Sari, go ahead and take it away with our questions.
Thanks so much, Chris. That was a great introduction. And yeah, just to reiterate, we are here to learn and grow, and most of all, respect one another. So let's just frame it that way today, because that's what we're all trying to do here as educators after all, right? So Jonathan, I just have to say that personally, I am just so excited to share this space with you, because I know that we've been doing these PBS NewsHour classroom Zooms for years, and this has been a topic that we've been talking about more and more, as you know why. And many teachers in this room tonight and on other nights have had personal experiences with book bans and educational gag orders and all the work that you are steeped in every day. So for the people, I love to frame things. Chris and I were talking about this the other day. Historical context is key. So before we even get into the heart of this, we'd love for you to provide the group with an overview of what book bans are, what are educational gag orders, and why they are occurring in educational settings, why they do, and why we're seeing more of a prevalence of them today.
Well, thanks so much. And it's great to be here with both of you and really all of you, and to talk about what I think is undoubtedly one of the biggest challenges public education has faced, in any of our lifetimes. And I haven't seen a lot of Virginia in the audience tonight, but I'll tell you a kind of recent phone call I had with a school librarian in Virginia. She'd been doing it for 20 years. And she said, in all of her career, she'd maybe had a parent, complain about a book 2 times, 2 different parents. And, it was like a very specific complaint about that parent for, their own child, until a year ago when suddenly, people were complaining about 100 books and demanding books be removed for all children. And sometimes it was unclear if the people who were filing complaints had parents in the classroom themselves. So it seemed to be the energy behind it seemed to be different. The quality of it, the character, the scale, the scope. I think the aggressiveness behind a lot of it, the kind of persistence and uncompromising nature of it is very new for people. And this is like one conversation I've had of, literally at this point, dozens that are quite similar over the past 2 years. And the stories are so similar, and it's remarkable. And I'm sure that many of you would feel, if I was to describe this in greater depth, you'd say, well, the same thing just happened to me last week, last month, 2 months ago, to my best friend teacher at the other school in the other city. And it really is that dynamic that has become now just like part of the everyday of teaching. And it really didn't used to be, even maybe 2 years ago. And I think the rapid change in the way that this has come about has caught many people in the world of education off guard, not in the sense that, we can't imagine these things happening, but it's quite different from, I think, anything most of us trained to be teachers with or talked about in schools, or anyone who is in higher education who is training teachers now. What advice do you give for people who are dealing with this? Because even I think I think teachers can be such wonderful diplomats, and I know many of you have to be diplomatic day to day, but even the most diplomatic among us are going to find your patience tried by this process and what's going on, even in the moments when you are not, depending on what state you're in, either just being told directly not to teach something the same way you did before, or not to carry a book you've carried before, or not to order a book that you were about to order, or to just remove some, book, curriculum, topic, field trip, school play, art project, research assignment from, your curriculum that you're doing. And so sometimes that's coming in direct ways, sometimes that's coming in indirect ways. And I think what my job has been, and what I'm trying to do now significantly, is really try and help the public understand the scope and the scale of this. So it's one thing, to count book bans. It's another to count, censorious education laws. And I've counted them all. I've read hundreds, literally hundreds of laws. Some became laws, some were just kind of proposals. And the things that are being proposed are just, run the gamut from things that are obviously designed to intimidate and censor teachers, and then things that seem a lot more reasonable. But once you understand what's really being proposed, if you are a teacher, if you have experience in education, if you understand the dynamics of what's going on, a lot of things that might seem more, even the things that seem less overtly like about censorship or authoritarianism, you can start to find them, and then you start seeing it. I don't want to say you see it everywhere, but you see that the scope of this is only getting broader. And to me, from where I sit, there's a very clear line in this of kind of escalating censorship from the original attacks, I think, back in 2019 and 2020 against the 1619 Project from the New York Times. And then from there, through the whole tunnel of the past 2 years, through CRT and what's the other one? SEL and LGBTQ targeting with the Don't Say Gay bills in Florida, now Iowa and elsewhere, and now more recently, just an all-out war on anything LGBTQ in schools whatsoever. And so I think it is a moment where it's quite clear to me that this is getting worse, but the duty on my shoulders as a kind of advocate in this space is to try and collect together the experiences and the stories of people on the front lines of this, because I keep coming back to this point, which is, if everyone just starts talking about this a lot more, it's going to be harder to instill so much fear in everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And the stories, I think, will be overwhelming.
You have a lot of folks in the chat tonight who have stories for you. But Chris, want to ask the next question?
They do.
They have lots of experience with that. If you look at the chat,
this is my first time co-hosting, and just listening to you, Jonathan, and break it all down is amazing. And then seeing the chat just going off. I mean, people are obviously invested, and I think it speaks volumes that so many people here tonight are pre-service teachers, and they want to know and learn how to navigate this before they get into the profession. So you've mentioned so many different types of legislation and bills, anti-LGBTQ plus bills, anti-CRT bills, SEL. It just seems so much that there's just like a cascade or something of just like overwhelming, legislation on teachers, that it's really tough for us to navigate. I'm still a high school history teacher, and I'm constantly reading about new laws. So our next question is, how can you find out about what's going on in your state in terms of book bans and curriculum bans and bills that have been proposed and passed? And I know Penn America has so many resources because I have sent them to people, but we would love to know, how can people get more informed of just an understanding of what's going on?
Yeah, I think that is so critical, because where people get informed and where they mobilize, where they share information, where they encourage other people to go to school board meetings, where they can support their students, that is where we can start to push back on this, because a lot of what's happening is highly, highly local. And even in the states like Florida, where you have got I don't know, I could say Florida, you could insert Missouri, I could insert so many states there, but all the states that have laws, what's actually remarkable is how uneven the application of the laws are. So, this has been the case in every kind of moment in this for the past 2 years. When Matt Krause in Texas circulated a list of 850 books, you had some school districts in Texas say, okay, if we've got one of these books, we're going to pull it from the shelves immediately. You have school districts in Austin who said, well, you have no authority to direct us to remove all of our books, so we're just not going to listen. So both of these school districts claim to be following the same rule or lack thereof, right? In Florida, you have school districts that have said, well, you can't teach about sexuality and gender, so we better ban all library books that mention two dads or even two male penguins who are in love. And then you have the state attorney general in a legal case saying that, oh, the law was never supposed to apply to school libraries. Anyways, it was just about instruction and curriculum. And now you have some school districts following one interpretation, some following another. Something like the Missouri law says very clearly that, you can all educators, all personnel. And I mean, the list of people in that Missouri law who could get in trouble for giving a book out is not just teachers. It's like teachers, librarians, custodial staff, occasional visitors to schools who hand a book out or something. Even that law has a very clear exception for, works with scientific value and artistic merit, etc. And nonetheless, you have books that are being pulled because of fear. And so I think what's important to understand in each of these states is that all of this does rely on ambiguous laws where the censorship is meant to be kind of foisted upon educators in schools, sort of to squeeze school districts so that they're not being told quite clearly what they can or cannot do. I didn't see a lot of Oklahoma here, but there's definitely Oklahoma where, you had school districts who got in trouble for that law. One school district had its status downgraded in Oklahoma, even though the offending activity happened like before the law went into effect. It doesn't even make any sense. And nonetheless, here you are being punished. So I think prevailing to like just the plain meaning of words, and saying, well, in each of these cases, we all are going to have to decide whether we're going to do the censors' work for them or whether we're not. And I think in each of these cases, the more that individuals can push back on laws that feel like they might be telling them to censor but aren't exactly, the more that we give into that, the worse this is going to get. And it's the same playbook that we've seen, even from Moms for Liberty and other groups early on, which described, online, here, challenge a few books, start with a few. Once you get them removed, then bring out the longer lists. It's the same concept. So start with a few and then get bigger. So, scare people a little and then scare them much, much bigger, scare them much more. And so that is the mentality here, is a kind of chipping away mentality. And that's why we want, of course, I'm someone who believes in diplomacy. I mentioned that. I believe in compromise. I do believe in the importance of discussion with people in good faith. I think one of the challenges right now is just to really say to one another as teachers, as principals, as superintendents, as school boards, that we have policies, we have processes, and we're going to follow them.
That's so helpful. Thank you. So there's so many questions. I have one more for you, and then we're going to toss to Catherine, and then we have a whole flow going. Luckily we're teachers and we can keep track of a lot at one time. So my last question for you, and we have some more later, is it works well with the last question where you were heading with it, which is basically what resources are available to teachers who want to navigate all these bans. And something that Chris, and I'm going to add this on, I'm going to go rogue. Chris and I were talking about this. Are there any teacher groups that are forming that you see that aren't just union groups that are challenging groups like Moms for Liberty? So part one is what resources are available to teachers, and do you see some grassroots groups organizing in the research that you've been doing among teachers?
Yeah, and I want to say also, you can always go to pen.org. We have pen.org/action, which usually sends people to information about book bans, or if you just look us up at Pen America and educational gag orders, you can always find the most recent information that we have available. We have tried to keep up-to-date information on the past 3 years, basically since 2021, about now censorious education laws that have been proposed or passed in different states and what they do, book bans. Now, a lot of the time, book bans we're tracking on an annual basis, which means, sometimes the book ban actually, has been won. It's over. Sometimes the book goes back. A lot of times, I'm sure some of you will be familiar with these dynamics. The book goes back, but then secretly it disappears again. There's these situations are not clean cut. The vast majority of them, they are complicated. They kind of have a long-term element to them. Certainly, like I think of Central York, Pennsylvania, they banned books, they brought them back, then they banned a few more quietly, then they were caught. Now they've changed their policies, and the students there did a great job of standing up to the book banners, in part by them organizing a protest where they would protest before school every morning until the books came back, and eventually they got the books back. So by and large, I do see that where students get involved, they can have a big impact. Students' voice matters a lot, and young people can often speak in ways and in, I don't know, with a kind of leeway that a lot of adults are afraid to, or teachers are afraid to, or librarians are afraid to. So if you have students who especially just high school students in particular, we run a program with the Brooklyn Public Library called the Freedom to Read Advocacy Institute, which we are going to launch in a week, and it runs over 4 sessions, basically for youth to come together and understand about how they organize. So to this question about organization, it's absolutely critical. If you're in Florida, the Florida Freedom to Read Project is where it's at. They have been an incredible organization. It was started by 3 moms, basically, who are upset about everything in Florida. And now, they're working, they've worked a lot with Penn. We have partnered to try and support groups in other states. And there are basically groups now forming in most states. Sometimes they're very local, like there's a few in Tennessee that have formed as just parents groups. There's a few there are a few groups that have formed kind of spinning out of library associations in some states. So it really does vary. But if you are interested in, starting a group, finding a group, connecting to a group, you want to just know where there might be people near you who you could join with, you can send us an email, and we're happy to try and make connections. You can reach us at education@penn.org. And we've tried, although it is challenging on the scope and scale with everything that's happening, to support and respond to every inquiry that comes in. But this is, I can't stress enough, a kind of moment for everybody to stand up. And this is, as I said, it's not just getting worse, it's getting more brazen, it's getting more bold. I think that the next legislative session, I'm just sort of waiting to see what ideas come forth next. And every year there's a set of proposals which are basically like new combinations of the worst things from the previous year, and then something you hadn't thought of yet. And in each state also, I really just want to stress this, we have to move towards seeing common cause among numerous groups of professionals, and I would include them teachers, librarians, university professors, artists, performers. I mean, almost all of these individuals and these professions in some way or another are being impacted right now. And I didn't say authors, of course. And so everyone who's interested in the creative and intellectual intersections of what makes a democracy thrive needs to realize that it's all under jeopardy right now.
I love that you're emphasizing the need for intersectionality in this movement. And just the other point we put a pin in earlier was the idea that they like to frame it as a parental rights issue, but it's also a youth rights issue. So really good point there. Chris, I think we have a nice running list of questions. Do you want to bring in our first question of the night for Jonathan?
Sure. And just so much that the resources you said, we've been putting it in the chat, by the way. So if you're not following the chat, we have been taking stuff from the Penn website, from Florida Freedom to Read, and putting them in there. And the idea that it's a parents' rights issue, in many ways, I know it's framed that way, but millions of teachers are parents. And in many ways, it's a false dichotomy. It's not like parents and teachers are enemies with one another. parents want the best for kids, and so do teachers. But our first question comes from Catherine, who says, what's the path forward for teachers? How can we change the narrative? And Catherine, if you want to add on to this question, feel free. But this was your question.
Yeah. Hi, guys. I'm Catherine Vaughn. I'm an elementary art teacher from rural West Tennessee. And hi, Jonathan. It's good to see you. We spoke before. So here in the rural South where I teach, it's a pretty extreme environment for educators. And I mean, I got bumped in the Walmart earlier today and called a groomer. So yeah, it's what it is.
That's so nice.
Yeah, I know. I was like, oh, thanks. So how do we work to change the narrative? I like what you said earlier about getting the youth involved and about the grassroots organizations, but every day teaching, I'm just afraid I'm going to end up on a lovely cable news channel being, called a groomer in public, like some of my friends have. So how do we change the overall narrative and get, some of the people that it's harder to reach, like the mamas and papas down here in the South that only vote for one political party? How do we help change that around?
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing that I've heard in talking to people in many conservative parts of the country is a feeling that something that has changed in the past few years, even in their communities, is kind of like new, more extreme, different, sudden, unexpected, and that there are a lot of individuals who, have maybe even themselves been conservative before, but they stand against book bans. And they kind of, I think it's really important that we try to not see this as a kind of typical partisan issue, because it isn't. I think that the piece of this that is, verging toward this kind of like total control of the circulation of information is really quite alarming to people when they start to understand it. So there is no single panacea answer to, the questions that you pose, but some things that I think can be effective. So one is that, in my experience, I have found that many people who subscribe to parents' rights as a kind of rhetoric frame might also subscribe to the belief in the First Amendment. Maybe there are also people who subscribe to the Second Amendment, but we'll put that one aside for now. Let's just stick to free speech. And what they are not understanding, and what they're not seeing in a lot of places, is that actually, whether we're talking about youth rights, maybe they don't like that framing, but liberty is a deeply American value. And at the end of the day, I think there is something that is an assault on liberty that's quite fundamental here, that goes beyond the typical talking points. And there's a way to lean into that in such a conversation with people. You're not trying to force anybody to do anything as a teacher, right? Your school isn't trying, if you're a librarian, you're not trying to make anybody read a certain book. You're trying to protect the liberties that are guaranteed to all of us. And in a diverse democracy where people come from different backgrounds, and again, that doesn't have to be just a kind of typical, more progressive racial groups and ethnic groups and LGBTQ diversity. I think political ideology is also a part of our diversity writ large. And I think you calling out to that as a way to signal that that's what you mean when you're talking about a vision of a more pluralistic or inclusive society is a good rhetorical pivot. I think if somebody is calling you a groomer, head on, we're all going to have to decide how we handle that moment, in the grocery store, in your car, at the school, is that the moment to say, hey, let's get a coffee for a minute, because I want to understand what exactly you're saying. I don't know. I don't know how reasonable that person is going to be, period. But what I will say is there are the things that you can do is, understand that someone is trying to rile you up, and the more that you get riled by it, you're kind of giving in. So not to say that it's easy to let such a thing roll off your back, but if you are in a public place and you do want to take 5 minutes and respond to someone and say, like, well, why are you saying that? I mean, just pose them a question that's really quite straightforward, and you'd be surprised, maybe they don't have much of an answer. Or the other thing that's really important and powerful for you all is to arm yourselves with a knowledge of where freedom of speech turns into harassment, libel, slander, whatever it is. Knowing these things, knowing some basic terms, particularly when it comes to situations online, but also situations interpersonally that could escalate with someone. At the end of the day, if someone is just calling you things and you're like, I'm just like not going to engage with you, right? You don't have to walk away, diffuse, walk away, turn away from it, right? Like you don't need to subject yourself to to that when it is in your face. But if it is someone who is actually like has a kid in your class right now, it's going to be hard to avoid that conversation at some point. If that's happening to you in a school or in like an actual parent teacher situation, that's an opportunity to bring in the principal and bring in some mediation. You don't want to subject yourself to that kind of grotesque insult. But it's a lot of times right now I think there is this it's kind of a bullying mentality. It's not actually based on any facts. We all know this. Those of us who like care about education, we know what we're doing, and we know that it isn't. We know how we're being mischaracterized as people who believe in education or democracy or liberty or what have you. And so those are some ways in which you can think about handling that situation.
Awesome. That's so helpful. Thank you. So we have a question from Shannon X, but before Chris brings her in, a lot of folks, in response to all the amazing stuff you were just sharing, in response to Catherine, they're asking what their legal rights are. We hear that all the time in these chats. What are their legal rights in these situations? I know it's probably state per state, especially without getting fired. Like, do you have any general advice, or do you feel like that needs to get a little more granular getting into legal rights?
It probably is going to vary. You do want to like check with like your rights as like an employee, etc. I think having some knowledge of that is useful. I think what's really critical when it comes to stuff like harassment, or if you want to know like any kind of legal claim, if you were ever to pursue it, the most critical thing is documentation. So if you have somebody who is like following you, screaming things at you in public, and it's happening on multiple occasions, and you've asked them quite clearly to stop, you want to start writing that stuff down. When did it happen? Find the specifics, that sort of thing. It seems, I know, kind of extreme, and I'm not advocating that as a like strategy for everyone in every situation, but that good documentation is key, because our memories can be it can be not only is such a situation going to be difficult to think straight in, because all of us like being called these things and being confronted, it's a situation where your hearts can rise. But if you have an interaction like this, and you want to go home, take out you English teachers, take out a diary, journal it. I know the tips for journaling for this audience. Find your I want to make a joke here about the scientific method, but I won't. I don't know what it is exactly. But the point is, you want to show your work, and you want to keep a good record for yourself. These are just the best teacher jokes I have to lighten the topic.
We like that. I don't remember the scientific method either. Sorry. Chris.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm not the only one that doesn't remember it. But I'm going to go ahead and toss it to a friend of mine and former colleague. Shannon and I actually taught together, and we taught pre-service teachers a history and practice course, and these issues again came up so much. So I know she's doing amazing work, and this means a lot to her. So Shannon, your next question is very important, and I'm very interested to hear this answer as well.
Well, thank you, Chris. And some of where we got there in that conversation, I think, teed this up, but we've been talking about words and verbal confrontations that are happening outside the classroom, outside the school board. Unfortunately, we're seeing worse than that. And I wonder if we can add that to this conversation. There are folks where conversations and mobilization around let's ban books and let's call out our teachers has actually turned into threats of violence and actual violence. And we've got just in the past month, we've only been in school here in Pennsylvania for a month. We've had schools shut down because of bomb threats in the wake of book challenges being successfully rebuffed. We've seen social studies teachers in national networks I belong to move to new states to teach in, because in their climate, school board members, governors mobilized the public against teachers in the face of these battles over book bannings. And those teachers were finding not just their own safety, but their children, their families' safety threatened in social media groups and these kind of things. And so, the rhetoric that surrounds some of these book challenges is escalating in places where teachers are not just afraid of losing their jobs. There are much more serious things to be afraid of. And so can we add that to this conversation?
It's just so shocking and upsetting, even to hear it and like think about it and imagine offering advice for something that is so teetering on real violence and real danger, which are very real in our country. What I would say is, if you can, connecting with people in your community is really critical. So starting like whether it's an email group or a text message, group with a Twitter group, whatever it is, with other people, so that you can rapid response and share information with one another. Obviously, like, once it's turning into real threats and real bomb threats, the police is is a necessity in these situations. And I think that it has gotten to the point that it is disrupting actual school is one of the greatest, most outrageous ironies in all of this. And believe it or not, I'm going to come full circle here, which is, of course, that's the history of this. If you look at like the history of the 1970s book challenges over multicultural textbooks that ended with a shootout. I think it was in West Virginia in the 1970s. And so I think what is perhaps not always well understood by the public is that there is, like, I was saying this to someone, or where did I say? I said this somewhere recently, which is, you have to really understand the mindset of somebody who, if you're a parent, and I'm a parent, a kid brings home something and it's in the bag and you have a question about it, you have to put your mindset there in the head of the person who pulls that out of the bag and says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm so mad about this. I'm going to go to the next school board meeting and read the parts of it aloud and 6 other books that are like it. And say nothing to anybody in the meantime, not trying to talk to a teacher, not trying to talk to my kid. I'm just going to go to a school board meeting and bring, 10 friends to do the same, right? So there's a kind of like, there's a logical jump here that makes no sense until you start to understand that this is a politically manufactured dynamic, that the vast majority, maybe there are some cases where parents are complaining about specific things. We've seen teachers get in trouble for specific handouts. I don't want to say it doesn't happen, but there's clearly like an element of this that's being organized in a different way. And, people who are doing this, are often subscribing to extremist rhetoric online or connected to extremist groups. In Texas, the first indication I had of this 2 years ago in Leander, Texas, where there were about 120 books that had been challenged and then were like suspended as part of this whole curriculum. And I remember the English teachers who were trying to fight it were, some of them, quite afraid to go to the school board meeting because there were like these local people coming on motorcycles and like threatening violence over it. It was like there was this real fear in the area that was like so outsized to the debate, so to speak, that was happening over like some books in a school, and I think that is another piece of this that is not being well understood, which is that, on the media, we, to the extent that we're having a conversation about parents' rights or having a conversation even about book bans, we often aren't actually having the conversation about extremism and violence and, a kind of vision of the United States, which has recurrently, there have been these efforts to kind of impose a very rigid religious view of like what morality is in the United States. And it is things like the First Amendment and free speech and diversity, which have risen up against that. But that's a kind of recurring thing that's part of, the United States history. And the most shocking, I think, or most clear parallel to what we're living through right now is the Comstock era, where, one person went to Congress, got them to pass a law that gave him the power to check everybody's mail, and then he, threw people in jail as he wanted to, particularly if they were circulating information at the time about birth control and basically some of the early modern sex education that existed in the 1920s. So that's the parallel to today, is somebody who was driven by this kind of personal moral conviction that they knew how to live better than everybody else, and their vision, they were kind of inspired by God to come and put that vision in the country. And I see that if you read hundreds of local book ban news stories, and I can tell you, having read hundreds of local book ban stories, you will see that this is the kind of comment that's there just behind the conversation about parents' rights. It's, well, actually, I went to a webinar online, they showed me these books, and they asked for a volunteer, and God compelled me to challenge the book. So that's what we're really fighting here. And I fear that every time we're talking about parents' rights seriously, we're actually not taking seriously a lot of where this is coming from, because the vast majority of parents, there's a vast majority of parents out there right now who parents' rights, it sort of sounds nice to them, but they're not like zealots for the cause, doing this.
Thank you so much, Shannon. That was such a good question. And Jonathan, I love this idea of us reclaiming the word liberty, because this really is an issue of liberty, and not in the way that Moms for Liberty are, I think, incorrectly using the term. So our next question comes from Linda. Had two really good questions. I'm going to let her choose which question she wants to ask, or maybe she has a different question. So Linda B., come on up with your question.
Hi, everyone. I'm a humble substitute teacher in the largest public school system in Maryland. And while we're pretty progressive and innovative generally, we are starting to feel the tingling of influence from Moms for Liberty. And it started with Muslim and Orthodox families challenging anything to do with LGBTQ plus in books or the curriculum. They wanted an opt-out. So the opt-out to me is the slippery slope. It's the beginning of the discussion. Once you start messing around with curriculum, if the sky's the limit. So I'm trying to understand this kind of obsession with sex and gender and sexuality, and how we change the narrative. And we have policies to support LGBTQ plus and people who are of every religious and ethnic background. How do we stop this in its tracks?
Yeah, I've been following some of the developments in Maryland. And I think it's a good example of how, whether we're talking about Maryland or California or New York, these sort of like blue states in people's minds, where actually a lot of this is still now also taking shape locally. I think the key to the historical piece of this is that at a certain point, a compact was made around sex education in particular, which was that in order to keep more families in public schools, you would allow parents to opt out of sex education. And this is pretty consistent in many states where there's a parental permission form that goes home. Vast majority of parents think about sex ed and they say, well, I don't want to have to talk about this with my kids, so could you just do it in the school? Thank you, save me the awkwardness. But there are people who, whether it's for religious beliefs, and I don't want to criticize those, but there are people who believe they don't want that. And so there's sort of been a compact reached that was like, okay, we're going to have sex ed in a small part of a school year. We're going to designate like 2-3 days, maybe 5, whatever it is, for that to happen, and you can opt out. Now, from this idea has come this much more expansive notion, which we've seen, passed into law in Tennessee and in Montana, and now proposed in many other states, which, and Tennessee and Montana, they actually passed this 2 years ago. So the roots of this are not actually as recent, although now it's starting to get more steam behind it, which is this idea about kind of saying, okay, you have to give any parent 30 days notice to opt their kid out before you're going to mention or teach about LGBTQ, I don't know, people, issues, whatever it is. And then, of course, well, that becomes completely unworkable, because that means you can't answer a kid's question. Let's say a kid has two dads in the class or whatever, or is asking about a celebrity who's gay, whatever it is, a historical figure. You know, the idea that you would have to get this kind of give this opt-in or opt-out opportunity to people basically also then serves to tell people exactly like what date and time you're going to mention this. And when, you know, in Tennessee, a story from a few months ago involved a Mother's Day lesson where there was a book that was one of the books that was being taught was about like kids who don't have a mom, who's a kid who has, I think, two dads in the book. And when the opt-out went home, a local Moms for Liberty organizer put pressure on the principal to tell the teacher not to teach the class at all. And so the opt-out becomes the reason or kind of vehicle for actually stopping the lesson from taking place whatsoever. And then I've seen in Ohio other extreme proposals, like, for example, a list of like 20 topics that you should be able to opt out of from your school, from, you know, racism to the Holocaust to slavery to, you know, anytime you're going to mention social emotional learning, diversity, anti-racism, etc. And so, you know, this idea of opt-out, once taken to that extreme, becomes essentially a way for any one individual to veto the teaching of any topic. So it's completely unworkable. It's unworkable for a teacher. It's unworkable from the perspective of state curricular standards that need to be met, or just from any notion, again, of liberty, right? That students should be able to ask questions and teachers should be able to answer them if you're going to have this kind of rigid enforced structure around people opting out. Now, the opt-outs is tricky because it reads and sounds to many people who aren't familiar with it like a reasonable compromise. And I think that that's part of what the challenge is in particular in the Maryland case, which is that if you aren't familiar with it, it looks like the school district is being unreasonable. But at a certain point, I think we do have to remember that our schools have to stand up for our public schools have to stand up for diversity, for diverse families, and the idea that we are going to, you know, let anybody opt out of just any topic is just not reasonable for a public school. And if you don't like that public school curriculum, I think you have to, you know, maybe that's a reason to not go to public school. And so for people who want that level of opt-out, I think it is reasonable for public schools to say that is a bureaucratic hurdle and being designed to, you know, suppress and censor what we teach.
Thank you so much, Linda, for your question. And Jonathan, that was so helpful.
Yeah, that was an incredible question. And then we're going to go to Annie's question. And we have a lot of questions here, by the way. So if you didn't hear yours just yet, just hold tight. But Annie's question is so important in the context of what Jonathan was just talking about. So Annie, the mic is yours.
Paging Annie to the stage.
Yeah, Annie, you can't drop such an amazing question in the chat. And
well, also, let's try to read. I just posted it again because they took an action. It wasn't just a question. She got a lot of questions, got a lot of answers, Annie. So
where are you, Annie?
Maybe just read it too. We mobilized in Virginia because this is
okay. I wasn't sure which Annie. Hi, sorry about that.
Oh, sorry, Annie.
Last winter.
There's a lot. Oh, there's a bunch of Annies. Okay, so
I don't know which Annie you were referring to, so I thought
hotline Annie.
Yeah, tell us about the teacher tip line because that was quite something.
Okay, so our current governor on his first day in office issued an executive order basically saying, as his running, you know, promise was he was going to get rid of CRT in Virginia. We don't teach CRT in Virginia except in law school, but he was going to get rid of it. But he issued an executive order saying that we would have his new appointed DOE folks go through every part of our curriculum for everything K-12 and prepare a list of divisive concepts was the phrase they used. And that he was setting up a teacher tip line for parents and students to call and report their teachers for teaching anything that was a divisive concept. Well, it backfired on him because from everything that we have heard, it was children for the most part, and parents were calling to say how much they loved their teacher and they appreciated them. It got so thousands were calling in to report good teaching of history or good teaching of literature that he shut it down and refused to share the results, even though FOIA requests came in from all over the state and the media. To this day, he will not tell us how many people, and he will not share any of the tips, but we heard there were a very, very small handful of people who reported any sort of bad teachers or nonsense. But we're told there are thousands who called to say, I love my teacher. I want my teacher to teach me the truth, or I want my kid's teacher to teach my kids the truth. So that was sort of his first blow up. Then he went on TV, CNN, and had this town hall as he was trying to push through railroaded teaching standards. He cast aside the ones that actual teachers and historians wrote, and he pulled in outside consultants from Hillsdale College and a few other organizations and presented their version, which had lots of factual errors, made no sense. Even the board that he mostly appointed had said, maybe not, let's go back to the drawing board. We attempted again for a compromise, the same group that had been appointed by the previous governor to review these. We came back with, we'll take some of your ideas, but we mainly are getting the inaccuracies folded out, and they still wouldn't accept that. So we had museums, historians, teachers, parents, special interest groups, lots of people mobilized. We showed up by the hundreds when it was open for public comment, and eventually they caved in on most, not everything. The part that we lost was the inquiry shift away from rote memorization. And what they did do was packed it with a bunch of factoids, trying to force us to not be able to go in any depth. So we are now, because they won't make any curriculum frameworks for us, we're making our own. We're learning to teach around the standards so that teachers don't cut out the inquiry and just go back to worksheets. So I feel like if we can do the same for our librarians, and we should, that he's lost his last two attempts to do this. I think that if we keep up the pressure and the voter turnout's high in November, then I think we will continue in Virginia at least to prove it can be done, but it takes a lot of grassroots organizing.
Yeah,
That's
a
all.
powerful story, success story for sure. And you mentioned librarians. We have a librarian that has a really good question that we can toss it to. Thanks for sharing, Ann. Before
Jean
ahead.
jumps in, sorry, Vicky wanted us to quickly share our Arizona superintendent anecdote. So really quickly, Jean, we're pulling you in, but a similar thing happened in Arizona, and the superintendent set up his own hotline. I followed Virginia's lead because I remember when y'all were doing that in Virginia. I did a TikTok about it, and my TikTok ended up on Fox News. And then I think, Chris, you did one in response, and we got the superintendent to respond because I said he was following in the footsteps of competing for DeSantis for who's the most fascist white supremacist leader of a state. And he said he wasn't a white supremacist, but I think by us sharing that hotline, a lot of people started calling in and doing the same thing. So it is a good strategy if you can mobilize like that.
Oh, absolutely. I remember your Insta reel got hundreds of thousands of views. And when I put mine on TikTok, it was being shared by celebrities and so many people literally across the country. It blew up in more ways than we could imagine. And it shut down the hotline. Like nobody could get through, and they eventually did away with it. But Jean, librarian, go ahead with your question, please.
Hey everyone, I'm coming out of Texas where, we have this House Bill 900 that is refusing to die. We've tried to put it to death many a times, and Judge Albright did pose an injunction, but the state has already filed against it. However, my question, we talk all the time about what effects these book bans have on kids, but we never give them the platform. We never give them the voice. We never give them the opportunity. So what I do with my kids, I challenge them to show up and speak up. This is your moment. This is your agency moment. If you don't want your rights taken from you or your books banned, go to the school board meeting. Ask for your 3 minutes when they open it up to the public and speak. This is your time for public performance. This is your time for civic duty. And I feel like school boards need to start listening to the kids. We talk all day in social studies about exercising your right, and you are a citizen and you are a participant in this country, but we don't give them the opportunities in the community to do just that. And I feel like if you want more credence in the book bans, give the kids an opportunity to say yay or nay, because these are teenagers. These are 4 and 5 years away from being legal adults, voting adults. And so when you look at, especially here in Texas, in our colleges, we have big numbers and big turnouts for voting. And I feel like that is another venue that we can get ahead with these book bans. When you start putting the microphones in the hands of the kids. ALA did last week. We had a whole kid panel that was run by the kids and led by and moderated by the kids, where they talked about this specific thing, showing up at the school board meetings and saying, no, you're not going to take my right away from me. You are infringing on my First Amendment right that I learned in the 11th grade. And this is me implementing, me standing up for my rights. So I would ask for all organizations, PEN America, or anyone that's listening, school boards, if you're on a school board, invite the kids to speak. Invite them to have a voice in the education system that you are representing. Because without it, you are literally just bullying your way over the kids and what they may want to read. And as a caveat, stop asking us librarians to snitch on kids and turn over to their parents or whomever that wants to look what they're reading. Because here's the thing, some of these kids are checking out information because they're curious, or they're scared, or they're dealing with something at home, and they're just trying to find a way to get a healthy understanding of it. And that's what a book can offer. We must remember that the books in the libraries represent everyone in the community, not just you. You can parent your kid, but you can't parent everybody's kid. And these kids need to start speaking up for their rights because it's being taken away from them.
Wow. I completely agree. And I've been fortunate to work in a school where students have also been advocating in very powerful ways. And Sarah, do you want to close it out and let Jonathan give his concluding remarks?
Yeah, and thank you again, Gene. We love hearing from Gene, Awakened Librarian on, I'm going to still call Twitter and elsewhere. But Jonathan, I just want to thank you so much for tonight. And there's so many more questions that we have. We always save the chat. We're recording this. We will make this available for people, and we can keep the conversation going on PBS NewsHour Classroom. But Jonathan, I just wanted to get some concluding remarks from you, and maybe you could embed a little bit of hope with some success stories for us, or what gives you hope in this movement right now that seems kind of grim in many states.
It does seem grim. And I'm watching, HB 900 in Texas as well. But I think, that in a lot of places, the more that this veers toward a version of extremism, the more that it kind of makes what's behind it a little more plain for a greater number of people. I think that, for everybody saying right now, the book bans have been exaggerated, or there's nothing to be alarmed about, there is essentially like a news story almost every single day now about some book banning somewhere that really is, just like shocking to the vast majority of people, whether we're talking about, Dr. Seuss being banned in Texas recently, or a Florida school district, explicitly saying remove all LGBTQ books. And I think what's critical is that more and more people get engaged. And I do experience that. I do actually experience a lot of hope day to day that more people are paying attention to this. And that for every story where, there are cases where, for like a lot of adults right now don't actually know what is in school libraries and how different it is from when we went to schools. Anybody who's probably over about 30 probably didn't have, many gay characters in books whatsoever, or characters of color, or like people who were very different. And there is a kind of empathy revolution in terms of the diversity of what's available in schools now, and teachers who are, trying to instill in younger people like those critical values of trying to look at, stories from different perspectives and understand people who are different. And so I think what we need to do is help people understand that, there may be a book that they don't understand why that book is in school, that doesn't really speak to them, and they don't think it should be there, but that there are other kids, what you were talking about, Gene, there are other students in the school district who come from different kinds of families, different kinds of backgrounds. And time and again, I think the more that we try to pigeonhole the notions of what any individual thinks is appropriate, we realize that librarians actually already have a rather elaborate notion of this, which is based on understanding that kids read at different levels. You can't have a kid, having kids is all about understanding that some kids are better at parts of school than others. Some kids are ready to read some topics and some books before others. And you have to, as a librarian, as a teacher, literature cater to a wide diversity of learners. And so, for people right now who are trying to kind of jump in on any one of these stories, I think it's about those of us who understand public education, helping them to understand, again, these fundamental freedoms, the freedom to read, the freedom to go to a library, pick out a book that interests you, or to stop reading it if you don't want to keep reading it, to put it down. And I think like everybody who believes in reading and understands the importance of literature can identify with that as an important part of growing and becoming a citizen. And so right now, more and more, we're seeing the need for just greater activation, greater solidarity, again, among all of us who are feeling this in one way or another. And there's a part for all of us to play. Don't give up hope, honestly. And even in the face of, again, more extremism in some communities, it's about helping the public around the country to see that for what it is and to understand it. And if you have something that's happening and you think that we should know about, please do reach out.
Thank you so much. We're so grateful. Chris?
Wow. No, I sincerely appreciate it, Jonathan. I mean, your expertise and your knowledge. I feel inspired and hopeful, especially after listening to you and then seeing everyone in here and being so active. You could tell teachers care. It's why we got into the profession in the first place, right?
And your support at Penn America has just been an anchor for us and such an amazing resource. So thank you for doing what you do. I know it's not easy, just going through all of this, but you do give us hope, and we're so appreciative of you and everyone at Penn America, and for taking time tonight to join us on a Tuesday night when I know you're busy. And I also want to thank Chris, and I both want to thank Vicki and everyone at NewsHour Classroom. Just an amazing resource for us and platform, and really ultimately all the teachers. Chris, do you want to thank all your teachers from Louisiana who joined tonight?
Oh my God, Louisiana showed up. I sincerely appreciate all the people from Louisiana who hopped on. There's a big election coming up, and you get to vote this weekend. And the way that goes, I mean, there's going to be a lot of laws passed if it goes a certain way, and that's not a secret, by the way. That was definitely said. But thank you to PBS for allowing us to, host this event. So it's much, much appreciated, and thanks to everyone for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night, and keep on reading, keep on fighting the fight to get everyone
Keep up the good fight.
Who knew that reading books would be so rebellious,
Right? Yeah. Take care, y'all.
Thanks, everyone.